I was running late. Not the best way to start a classified briefing, but the message had come through while I was in the shower, and the USS Enterprise is a damn big ship to cross when you're in a hurry. I jogged the last stretch of corridor, straightening my uniform collar. The metal door to briefing room C was closed. Shit. I checked my watch. 07:05, 5 minutes late. I took a breath, knocked once, and went in. 4 men looked up as I entered. 3 of them I knew. Jackson Roach sat with Lee Rios and Keith Simmons at the small table. The 4th guy stood at the front of the room, tall, broad-shouldered, with the posture of someone who'd spent decades in uniform. "Lieutenant Chapman," he said. Not a question. "Nice of you to join us." "Sorry, sir. Just got the message." He nodded like he'd already moved on. "I'm Commander Sean Gardner. Take a seat." I slid into the empty chair next to Jackson, who shot me a quick look that said we'd talk later. Gardner looked like hell. His uniform was perfect, every crease where it should be, ribbons lined up precisely, but his face told a different story. Deep circles under bloodshot eyes, skin gray with exhaustion, the kind of tired that coffee can't fix. "Gentlemen, this briefing is classified," Gardner said, his voice surprisingly strong for a man who looked ready to collapse. "Nothing we discuss leaves this room. Is that understood?" We all nodded. Standard stuff for special ops. At Aerojo 30 yesterday, our radar station on Guadalcanal picked up an unidentified aircraft approaching from the northwest. The craft went down approximately 7 miles inland on Malaita in the Solomon Chain. Gardner unrolled a map across the table. His finger tapped a spot in the dense green center of the island. "Intelligence suggests it was a Japanese aircraft carrying sensitive materials. Your mission is to locate the crash site, retrieve any intelligence, and return to the Enterprise." I glanced at Jackson, who raised an eyebrow slightly. Something didn't add up. "Sir," I said, "with respect, why send pilots for a ground recovery mission? Wouldn't a Marine team be better equipped?" Gardner's eyes locked onto mine. Cold. Assessing. "This operation requires a small footprint. You're trained in survival and basic ground operations. The 4 of you will handle it." "What kind of aircraft was it, sir?" Jackson asked. "And what intelligence are we looking for, specifically?" "Need-to-know basis, Lieutenant Roach. You'll recognize the intelligence when you find it." That wasn't an answer. More red flags. Gardner continued outlining the mission. We'd fly a transport to a small clearing about 2 miles from the crash coordinates. Hike in, secure whatever materials we could find. Hike out. Simple on paper. "Any indigenous population in the area?" Lee asked. "Minimal. Scattered villages, but not near the crash site according to our intel." "Japanese presence?" Keith's question was the obvious next one. "Unknown. We don't believe they have permanent forces on Malaita, but they may send their own recovery team. Speed is essential." Gardner handed each of us a sealed envelope. "Your detailed instructions. Memorize and destroy before takeoff. You leave at 04:30 tomorrow." He gathered his papers with efficient movements. "Questions?" I had about 50, but his tone made it clear he wasn't interested in answering them. "No, sir," we responded almost in unison. "Dismissed." We filed out of the room. Nobody spoke until we were halfway down the corridor and sure Gardner wasn't following. "Well, that was weird as hell," I said, keeping my voice low. Jackson nodded. "Since when do they send pilots to play jungle commandos?" "And did you notice he never said what type of aircraft we're looking for?" I added. "Or what exactly we're supposed to bring back." "Maybe it's in the envelope," Lee suggested, tapping his against his palm. "Maybe, but I doubted it." Gardner was keeping something back. I could feel it. "I don't like it," Jackson said as we reached the mess hall. 4 pilots with minimal ground training sent to recover intelligence that isn't specified, from an aircraft type that isn't specified. "Orders are orders," Keith said with a shrug, but even he didn't sound convinced. We grabbed coffee and found a corner table away from everyone else. I opened my envelope under the table, scanning the contents. Just what Gardner had already told us, plus coordinates and a rough terrain map. "Nothing new here," I muttered. "You guys?" 3 head shakes. "So we're flying into potentially hostile territory to recover something we can't identify from a crash site we have approximate coordinates for," Jackson summarized. "Pretty much." We spent the rest of the day prepping our gear. Combat knives, sidearms, basic survival equipment. Not standard pilot loadout, that's for sure. I kept thinking about Gardner. The exhaustion in his eyes didn't match his crisp uniform and clear briefing. Like he'd been awake for days, but made damn sure not to look it. And those non-answers about what we were retrieving. Something wasn't right. That night, Jackson and I did final equipment checks in our quarters. The pre-mission ritual we'd developed over 2 years of flying together. "What do you think we're really looking for?" I asked, checking the action on my sidearm for the 3rd time. Jackson sat on his bunk, repacking his rucksack. "Something they don't want to put in writing. Something worth risking 4 pilots for. Why not send a special ops team? They're trained for this." "That's what bothers me," Jackson said, looking up. "Why pilots? Unless they expect us to fly something out," I finished his thought. "Exactly." I zipped my pack closed and set it by the door. "Tomorrow's going to be interesting." That's one word for it. I lay in my bunk that night, staring at the ceiling. If they needed pilots to recover something flyable, why not just say so? And if that wasn't it, why send us at all? Gardner was holding back information that could get us killed. I couldn't shake the feeling we were being fed just enough of the truth to get us there, but not enough to understand what we were walking into. The alarm went off at 0400. I reached over and shut it off before it woke Jackson, but he was already sitting up on his bunk. "You sleep at all?" he asked, rubbing his face. "A little." We dressed in silence, checking our gear one last time. Standard flight suits, but with extra pockets stuffed with things pilots don't usually carry. Ammunition, extra water purification tablets, a small medical kit. I strapped my sidearm to my thigh and felt the weight of it. Pilots aren't supposed to need guns, not like this. "Ready?" Jackson asked, shouldering his pack. I nodded and we headed out. The carrier was quiet at this hour, just skeleton crew moving around. We made our way to the mess hall where Lee and Keith were already sitting with coffee and barely touched breakfast. "Morning, gentlemen," I said, grabbing coffee for myself. Lee looked up. "Morning. You two look like hell." "Thanks," Jackson said, sliding onto the bench. "You're a real charmer before sunrise." Keith checked his watch. 20 minutes till we need to be on deck. We went over the mission details one more time, keeping our voices low. Nobody mentioned how strange it all was. We'd all had that conversation yesterday. Now it was just about getting it done. At 04:30 on the dot, we were on the flight deck. The seaplanes were prepped and waiting. 2 PBY Catalinas. Big, ugly, dependable birds that could land on water. Not what I usually flew, but I'd logged enough hours to be comfortable. Commander Gardner was there, still looking like he hadn't slept in days. He handed each of us a sealed envelope. "Your final coordinates," he said. "Open these when you're an hour out." I tucked mine into my breast pocket. "Any last-minute intelligence we should know about, sir?" "Just get there, find what needs finding, and get back," he said. His eyes darted around the deck. "Keep radio contact to a minimum once you're in the target area." We saluted and climbed aboard our respective planes. Jackson and I took one, Lee and Keith took the other. I ran through pre-flight checks with Jackson while the deck crew finished fueling us up. At exactly 500 we took off. The carrier fell away beneath us, and then it was just ocean in every direction, turning from black to deep blue as the sun started coming up. Our seaplane handled well, and I could see Lee and Keith flying about half a mile off our starboard side. "Beautiful morning," Jackson said once we'd reached cruising altitude. "Yeah." The sky was clear, just a few high clouds, perfect visibility. Almost makes you forget we're heading into who knows what. Almost. We flew in silence for a while. I kept an eye on our heading and the basic navigation charts we'd been given. Everything matched up with what we expected. 3 hours in, we opened the sealed coordinates. They weren't far off from what Gardner had told us in the briefing. I adjusted our course slightly and radioed Lee to do the same. "Copy that," came Lee's voice over the radio. "ETA about 1 hour to target area." The 4th hour of flight was uneventful. Just blue ocean below us, occasional islands in the distance. The Solomon chain was coming up, and I kept my eyes peeled for Malaita. Then I saw it. A wall of fog sitting over the water ahead of us, thick, gray, and definitely not on any weather report we'd been given. "You seeing this?" I asked Jackson. He leaned forward in his seat. "Yeah, that's not normal." I grabbed the radio. "Rios, you copy? We've got a fog bank ahead that wasn't in the weather briefing. Stay close." "Roger that," Lee responded. "We see it. Looks dense." I watched as their plane moved in closer to ours. We were about 2 minutes from hitting the fog, and something about it made my stomach tighten. It wasn't moving like regular fog. It just sat there, a perfect wall across our path. "Should we try to go around it?" Jackson asked. I checked our fuel gauges. Negative. We need to stay on course. Just keep visual contact with the other plane as long as possible. We hit the fog bank seconds later. Visibility dropped to almost nothing instantly. I could barely see the wingtips. "Christ," Jackson muttered. "This is thick." I kept us steady, watching my instruments. Then the compass started to spin. Not drift. Spin, like someone was running a magnet around it. What the hell? I tapped the glass, but it kept spinning. I glanced at the altimeter, which was fluctuating wildly. "Rios, do you copy? Our instruments are malfunctioning." Static was the only response. "Rios? Keith? Do you read me?" Nothing but crackling static. "Radio's dead," Jackson said, flipping switches. "And I'm getting crazy readings on everything." The plane lurched suddenly, dropping altitude. I gripped the controls, trying to level us out, but they felt sluggish, like the air had turned to molasses. "We're dropping!" Jackson shouted. "We're at... I don't know. The altimeter's going crazy." I know. I fought with the controls. The engines were still running, but the aircraft wasn't responding right. "We're flying blind here." Another lurch, and the nose dipped. I pulled back hard on the yoke. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then slowly, the plane started to level out. "There's something wrong with this fog," Jackson said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tension in it. "This isn't natural." I didn't answer. I was focused entirely on keeping us from nosediving into the ocean. Sweat dripped down my back as I wrestled with the controls. The fog pressed against the windshield like it was solid. Then suddenly, there was a break. Just for a second, I saw something below us. "Land!" I shouted. "I saw land." "Where?" I don't see anything. The fog thinned just enough for me to make out a coastline, a beach, trees beyond it. It wasn't where we were supposed to be. We were still a good 30 miles from Malaita according to our charts. But it was land. I'm taking us down, I said. Prepare for water landing. I dropped our altitude carefully, fighting the unresponsive controls every inch of the way. The closer we got to the water, the clearer things became. The fog was thinner near the surface. There, Jackson pointed. I see it now. Beach dead ahead, maybe half a mile out. I lined us up for landing, cutting speed. Brace yourself, this might be rough. The seaplane hit the water with a jolt that rattled my teeth. We skipped once, twice, then settled into a smooth glide across the surface. I cut the engines as we coasted toward the shore, finally coming to a stop about 200 yards from the beach. Jackson and I looked at each other. Neither of us said anything for a moment. We made it, he finally said. Yeah. I unbuckled my harness. Let's secure the plane and get to shore. Hopefully Lee and Keith made it through too. We grabbed our packs and sidearms, then lowered the small raft from the seaplane's storage compartment. Just as we were pushing off, we heard the sound of another aircraft. That's them, Jackson said, looking up. Through patches in the fog, we could see the second Catalina making its approach. Their landing was smoother than ours had been. They taxied closer to shore before dropping their raft. We met on the beach 10 minutes later. Lee looked pale, and Keith had a small cut on his forehead, but they were otherwise fine. What the hell was that? Lee asked as soon as we were all together. Our instruments went completely haywire. Same here, I said. Radio dead, compass spinning, the works. Keith was scanning the tree line, his hand resting on his holstered sidearm. Anyone else notice how quiet it is? He was right. There were no bird calls, no insects buzzing, no sounds of animals moving in the underbrush, just the gentle lapping of waves behind us. Where are we? Jackson asked. This can't be Malaita. The geography's all wrong. I pulled out our map and checked it against the coastline. Nothing matched. I don't think we're on any chart, I said finally. We all drew our weapons then, forming a loose circle as we surveyed our surroundings. The beach stretched about half a mile in either direction before curving out of sight. Behind us, the strange fog still hung over the water. Ahead, dense jungle began about 50 yards from the shoreline. The stillness made my skin crawl. It wasn't just quiet. It felt wrong somehow, like the whole island was holding its breath. We headed into the jungle, me in front with the map. Jackson stayed right behind me, while Lee and Keith brought up the rear. The trees closed in fast once we left the beach. Thick vines hung everywhere, and the ground was a mess of roots and mud. Should be about half a mile inland, I said, checking the coordinates again. Due east from where we landed. We pushed on, cutting through some vines with our knives when they got too thick. The humidity was brutal. Sweat soaked through my flight suit in minutes, and I had to keep wiping my forehead to keep it out of my eyes. Anyone else feel like we're being watched? Lee asked. I didn't answer. Truth was, I did feel it, that prickle on the back of your neck, but saying it out loud wouldn't help anyone. After about 20 minutes of hiking, the trees thinned out ahead. I held up my hand, and everyone stopped. Clearing up ahead, I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I was keeping my voice down. Let's approach slow. We moved forward carefully until we reached the edge of a small opening in the jungle. And there it was, a crashed aircraft sitting at an angle, its nose partially buried in the dirt. Vines and other plants had already started growing over parts of it. Japanese, Jackson confirmed. Looks like a fighter variant. I nodded. Spread out. Check the perimeter first before we approach. We circled the clearing, making sure we were alone. When I was satisfied, I signaled for us to move in toward the plane. Something's off about this, I said as I got closer. The fuselage had markings I'd never seen before on Japanese aircraft. There was the typical rising sun emblem, but around it were strange symbols. Not Japanese characters, not anything I recognized. "What the hell are those?" Keith asked, pointing at the symbols. "No idea," I said, "but they're all over this thing." The aircraft was mostly intact. Whatever brought it down hadn't completely destroyed it. The wings were damaged, and the landing gear was crushed, but the cockpit and fuselage seemed whole. "I'm going to check inside," I told the others. "Jackson, watch my back. Lee, Keith, keep an eye on the tree line." I climbed onto the wing and looked into the cockpit. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. 2 bodies, both men in Japanese military uniforms, both very dead. "Got 2 pilots," I called back. "Deceased." Jackson climbed up beside me. "Jesus," he muttered when he saw them. I carefully reached past the first body to check for identification. Found a wallet with papers in it. The name on the ID card read Atlas Hiroshi Lee, with a photo that matched the dead man's face. "This is strange," I said, pointing to a mark on Lee's neck. It was purple, almost like a brand or burn, in a pattern I'd never seen before. "Look at this." Jackson leaned in. "What the hell is that? Some kind of injury?" "Doesn't look like any injury I've ever seen." I moved on to examine the second pilot. This one was worse. His face was frozen in what could only be described as extreme terror. Eyes bulging, mouth open in what must have been a scream. His hands were locked in a claw-like position, as if he'd been trying to grab something. I found his ID, too. "Sean Kenji Anderson," I read, "another Japanese pilot." "What killed them?" Jackson asked. "I don't see any wounds." "No idea," I admitted. "This one looks like he died of fright, if that's even possible." Lee called up from below. "Find anything important yet?" "Working on it," I called back. "Keep watch." I started searching the cockpit for anything that might be the intelligence Gardner sent us for. There was a compartment under the instrument panel. I pried it open and found a leather pouch inside. "Got something," I told Jackson as I pulled it out. Inside the pouch were several folded papers. I opened one and immediately felt my stomach drop. The page was covered in the same strange symbols we'd seen on the outside of the plane. "What is it?" Jackson asked. "Not sure," I said, flipping through the pages. "Documents with weird markings, same as the ones on the fuselage." Some pages had diagrams too, drawings that didn't make any sense to me. They showed shapes and patterns that hurt my eyes a little if I looked at them too long. "Is that what we came for?" Jackson asked. "Must be," I said, carefully putting the papers back in the pouch. "Nothing else here looks like intelligence material." I took another look at the dead pilots. What the hell happened to these guys? The one with the purple mark seemed almost peaceful compared to Anderson with his face frozen in horror. "Let's get out of here," I said, securing the pouch inside my flight suit. "This place gives me the creeps." We climbed down from the aircraft. Keith and Lee looked at us expectantly. "Got what we came for," I told them, patting my chest where the pouch sat. "Some kind of documents with strange symbols." "What about the pilots?" Lee asked. "Dead," Jackson said, in a weird way. "What do you mean, weird?" Keith asked. "One has some kind of purple mark on his neck," I explained. "The other looks like he died of pure fear. Never seen anything like it." The 4 of us stood there for a moment, looking at the crashed plane. The silence of the jungle felt even heavier now. "Let's head back to the beach," I said finally. "We need to figure out how to get these planes working again and get off this island." As we turned to leave, I couldn't shake the image of Anderson's terrified face from my mind. What could make a man look like that? And those symbols, on the plane and the documents, what did they mean? I tucked the leather pouch more securely inside my flight suit. Whatever we'd found, it felt wrong. The whole situation felt wrong. The unnatural silence, the strange deaths, the mysterious symbols. I just wanted to complete the mission and get the hell out of here. I pulled the documents from the pouch and spread them on a flat rock. The symbols didn't make any sense. Some looked like Japanese characters, but twisted and wrong somehow. There were diagrams too, circles with lines connecting them, and what looked like a map, but not of any place I recognized. "What is it?" Jackson leaned over my shoulder. "No idea, nothing I've ever seen before." I turned one of the pages sideways. "This part looks like coordinates, maybe." Lee crouched down next to us. "Those symbols around the edge, they're not standard Japanese military." I was about to respond when a sharp crack split the air. Something hit the tree next to my head, sending bark flying. "Down!" I yelled, diving behind the rock as more shots rang out. We all scrambled for cover. I shoved the documents back in the pouch and tucked it inside my flight suit. Jackson was already behind a thick tree trunk, his sidearm drawn. Keith rolled behind a fallen log about 10 feet away. Lee made it to a cluster of rocks. More gunfire erupted from the jungle. I risked a peek and saw them, Japanese soldiers moving through the trees, maybe a dozen, all in uniform. A tall officer with a stern face barked orders at the front. "We've got company," I called out, ducking back as bullets thudded into the dirt near me. "How many?" Jackson shouted over the noise. "At least 10, maybe more." I pulled my sidearm and fired off 2 rounds toward the advancing soldiers. "Keith, can you circle left?" Keith nodded and started moving, staying low. I fired again to give him cover. "Lee, you good?" I called. "Yeah." He popped up and got off 3 shots before ducking down again. The Japanese were getting closer, spreading out to flank us. I took aim at one moving between trees and fired. He went down. Another shot from my right. Jackson hit a second soldier. But they kept coming. We were outnumbered, and they had better weapons. The officer was shouting something I couldn't understand, directing his men to surround us. That's when I saw it. Behind the Japanese soldiers, something moved in the mist. Something big. It was pale. Not white exactly, more like the color of a dead fish's belly. And it had eyes. Red eyes that glowed like hot coals. I froze for a second. It wasn't human, not even close. The thing was massive, at least 7 feet tall, with a shape that seemed to shift and change as it moved. "What the hell is that?" I whispered to myself. The Japanese officer saw it too. His face changed from determination to pure terror in an instant. He started shouting to his men, pointing at the thing in the fog. They turned, redirecting their fire from us to whatever was behind them. The creature moved fast, too fast for something that size. 1 second it was in the mist, the next it was on one of the soldiers. I couldn't see exactly what happened, but the man's scream cut through everything else. "Now's our chance," I yelled to the others. "Back to the planes, go!" We didn't need to be told twice. Keith was already moving, with Lee right behind him. Jackson fired 2 more shots toward the Japanese before following. I brought up the rear, running backward for a few steps to make sure nothing followed us. The Japanese weren't even looking our way anymore. They were too busy firing at the thing that was tearing through their ranks. We ran hard through the jungle, branches whipping at our faces. The sounds behind us were getting worse. Not just gunfire, but screams that didn't sound human at all. There were wet, tearing noises that made my stomach turn. I couldn't help myself. About 50 yards into our retreat, I looked back. Through gaps in the trees, I saw the pale thing dragging one of the Japanese soldiers into the fog. The man was screaming, clawing at the ground, trying to hold on to anything. Then he disappeared into the mist, and his screams just stopped, cut off like someone had flipped a switch. My heart hammered against my ribs as I turned and ran to catch up with the others. The jungle seemed to close in around us, the silence from earlier now broken by distant gunfire and those inhuman screams. What was that thing? Jackson gasped as we ran. No idea, I panted, but we need to get the hell off this island. We pushed on toward the beach, but a sick feeling settled in my gut. We were caught in the middle now, Japanese soldiers on one side and something much worse on the other. Something that didn't belong here. Something that had terrified, hardened Japanese soldiers enough to make them forget about us completely. And we were trapped with it on this silent, wrong island. We burst out of the tree line onto the beach, all of us gasping for air. My lungs burned from running, and sweat soaked through my flight suit. I bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath while keeping an eye on the jungle behind us. "Everyone okay?" I managed between breaths. "I'm hit," Lee said, grimacing. He was clutching his upper arm, blood seeping between his fingers. I straightened up and moved to him. "Let me see." Lee pulled his hand away. The bullet had torn through his sleeve and carved a groove along the outside of his arm. Not deep, but bleeding steadily. "Just a graze," I said. "We'll patch it up in the plane." I pulled the emergency med kit from my pack and tossed it to Keith. "Patch Lee up. Jackson and I will prep our plane. Then we help with yours." The beach felt exposed, too open. I kept scanning the tree line, expecting either Japanese soldiers or that pale thing to come charging out any second. The fog hung thick at the edge of the jungle, almost like it was watching us. Jackson and I waded out to our Catalina. The water was cold against my legs, a stark contrast to the humid air. We climbed aboard and went through our checklist as fast as we could. "Fuel looks good," Jackson said, checking the gauge. I ran my hands along the control panel. Everything seems normal now, not like when we were in that fog. "You think we'll make it through that soup?" Jackson asked, glancing at the fog bank that still surrounded the island. "We don't have a choice." I kept looking over my shoulder as we worked, scanning the tree line and the beach where Keith was wrapping Lee's arm. The documents from the crashed plane pressed against my chest inside my flight suit, a constant reminder of what we came for. Whatever those papers contained, they'd better be worth all this. We finished our pre-flight checks and waded back to shore to help with the second plane. Lee looked better, his arm bandaged tight with Keith's handiwork. "How's it feel?" I asked. "Hurts like hell, but I'll manage," Lee said. "I can still fly." Keith was still on edge. "We getting out of here or what?" "Our priority is getting airborne," I said. We helped Lee and Keith prep their Catalina, everyone working double time. The silence of the island pressed in on us. No birds, no insects, nothing but the sound of our own breathing and the gentle lapping of waves on the shore. As we finished, I noticed something strange. The fog that had surrounded the island was starting to thin directly in front of our planes, opening up like a corridor out to sea. "You guys see that?" I pointed. Jackson squinted. "The fog's clearing." "Just there," Lee said. "Nowhere else." Keith shook his head. "This whole island is wrong." It was almost like the fog was giving us permission to leave, opening just enough for us to take off. I didn't like it, but I wasn't about to question our luck. "Let's go," I said, "before it changes its mind." We split up to our respective planes. Jackson and I climbed aboard ours, and I strapped myself into the pilot's seat. Through the windshield, I could see Lee and Keith boarding their Catalina. "Ready?" I asked Jackson. He nodded, his face grim. "More than ready." I started the engines, feeling them rumble to life. The instruments all read normal now, nothing like the chaos we'd experienced coming in. I taxied the seaplane forward, gaining speed across the water. The Catalina lifted smoothly, breaking free from the surface, and we climbed into the air. Looking back, I saw Lee and Keith's plane following close behind. As we gained altitude, I got a clear view of the island below us. The fog formed an almost perfect circle around it, like a living barrier. From above, the island looked small and insignificant, just another patch of green in the vast blue ocean. Hard to believe something so terrifying lurked in those trees. We passed through the narrow corridor in the fog, and once we were clear, I set course for the carrier. The instruments stayed steady, and the radio crackled back to life. "Enterprise, this is Catalina 17. Do you read?" "Over." No response, but at least the radio was working again. Jackson leaned back in his seat and let out a long breath. "Jesus Christ." I nodded, keeping my eyes forward. "Yeah." We flew in silence for a while, the drone of the engines filling the cabin. The documents pressed against my chest felt heavier somehow. "You think Gardner knew?" Jackson finally asked. I considered this. About the creature? I don't know, but he knew something, the way he looked when he briefed us. He was holding back. So what now? "Now we deliver these documents," I said, tapping my chest where the pouch sat. "And then I'm going to have a talk with Commander Gardner about what exactly he sent us into." Jackson nodded. "I'm right behind you." I checked our fuel gauges and adjusted our heading slightly. We had a long flight ahead of us, but my mind was already on the confrontation to come. Gardner had some explaining to do. About the island, about the documents, about that thing in the fog. I was going to get answers, one way or another. We landed back on the Enterprise around 1800 hours. My shoulders ached from the tension of flying so long. The carrier looked so normal, like nothing had changed. But everything had. We taxied to our designated spots and shut down the engines. I sat there for a minute, not moving. Jackson didn't say anything. He just waited. "You ready?" he finally asked. "Yeah." We climbed out and met Lee and Keith on the deck. Lee's bandage had a small spot of blood showing through, but he seemed okay. Keith looked pale. "What now?" Lee asked, keeping his voice low. "We report to Gardner," I said. "Stick to what we saw. No speculation." A deck officer approached and told us Commander Gardner wanted us in briefing room C immediately. No time to even clean up. We headed below deck, our flight suits still damp with sweat. Gardner was waiting alone when we arrived. He stood at the head of the table looking just as exhausted as before. Maybe worse. "Sit," he ordered. We took the same seats as before. I put the leather pouch with the documents on the table in front of me. "Report," Gardner said, looking at me. "Sir, we encountered heavy fog approximately 4 hours into the flight. Our instruments malfunctioned, and we lost radio contact. We made emergency landings on an uncharted island." Gardner's face gave away nothing. We located the crash site as instructed. Japanese fighter, 2 dead pilots. I slid the pouch across the table. We recovered these documents. Gardner took the pouch but didn't open it, just set it aside. Anything else to report? I glanced at the others, then back at Gardner. Yes, sir. We encountered Japanese soldiers on the island, approximately a dozen. They engaged us. Gardner's eyes narrowed slightly. Casualties? None on our side. Lee took a minor wound. I hesitated, then continued. The Japanese were attacked by something in the fog, some kind of creature. Gardner's expression hardened. Creature? Explain. Large, pale, moved fast. Red eyes. It attacked the Japanese soldiers, which allowed us to escape. Gardner stared at me for a long moment. Then he looked at each of the others. Is this accurate? They all nodded. Gardner took a deep breath. Lieutenant Chapman, what you saw was nothing. There was no creature. You encountered bad weather, made an emergency landing, recovered documents from a crashed Japanese reconnaissance plane, and returned to the carrier. I blinked. Sir? You encountered bad weather and Japanese soldiers, nothing else. I felt my face get hot. Sir, with all due respect, we all saw it, whatever that thing was. There was no thing, Lieutenant, Gardner cut in sharply, just bad weather and combat stress. I looked at the others. Keith's jaw was tight. Lee was staring at the table. Jackson met my eyes and gave a small nod. I turned back to Gardner. Sir, we know what we saw. That wasn't combat stress. It killed Japanese soldiers right in front of us. You're mistaken, Gardner said flatly. Something in me snapped. I slammed my fist on the table and stood up. God damn it, sir. My men nearly died out there. We deserve to know what the hell is going on. Lieutenant, Gardner barked, stand down immediately. I stayed standing, my hands flat on the table now, leaning toward him. Tell us the truth. What was on that island? Gardner and I stared at each other for what felt like forever. The room was dead silent. Finally, something in his face changed. He seemed to age 10 years right in front of me. Sit down, he said quietly. I sat. Gardner rubbed his eyes. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. If it does, I'll personally see you court-martialed and shot for treason. Am I clear? We all nodded. Gardner sighed. That island was designated Quarantine Zone X7 in 1938. It doesn't appear on any public charts. The Japanese aircraft violated the quarantine accidentally. Quarantine? Jackson asked. For what? Gardner's eyes moved to the pouch on the table. In 1937, a geological survey team discovered something on that island. Something that should have stayed buried. He paused. The government has been containing the situation under the code name Operation Golden Fleece. What did they find? I asked. That's above your clearance, Gardner said. All you need to know is that what you saw on that island is classified at the highest levels. Keith leaned forward. But sir, what was that thing? It wasn't human. Gardner's face hardened again. This conversation is over. You will all sign non-disclosure agreements before you leave this room. You encountered bad weather and recovered documents from a crashed Japanese aircraft. That's all. But, Lee started. That's all, Lieutenant, Gardner snapped. You want to push this? Fine. Let me be crystal clear. If any of you speaks about what happened on that island, what you think happened, you'll be tried for treason in wartime. The punishment for that is execution. The room went silent again. Gardner stood up, gathering the pouch. You're dismissed. Report to medical for evaluation, then get some rest. The paperwork will be delivered to your quarters. He walked to the door, then turned back. Remember what I said. This never happened. The door closed behind him. The four of us sat there, not speaking. "Jesus," Keith finally whispered. I stood up slowly. "Let's go." We filed out of the room. As we walked down the corridor toward medical, I couldn't stop thinking about Gardner's face when he mentioned the geological survey. He was scared. Whatever they found on that island in 1937, whatever that thing in the fog was, the government feared it enough to threaten us with execution just for talking about it. I had more questions now than when we landed, and no way to get answers. I couldn't sleep. Almost midnight. The carrier hummed around me, metal settling distant machinery. Jackson's bunk was empty. He'd gone to check on Lee after dinner, said he'd be back soon. I was mid-pace when something slid under my door. A folded piece of paper. I grabbed it, opened it fast. "Keith's gone. Argued with MPs about island. They took him. Not sure where. Be careful. Jay." My stomach dropped. I crumpled the note in my fist. This wasn't good. I pulled on my boots and uniform pants quickly, not bothering with the rest of my uniform. No time. If they'd taken Keith, we were all in trouble. I shoved the note in my pocket and stepped into the corridor, looking both ways before moving. The hallways were mostly empty this late. A few crew members nodded as they passed. I kept my face neutral, like I was just heading for a late-night coffee. Inside, my mind raced. Keith's quarters first. I reached his door and knocked. Nothing. I tried the handle. Unlocked. Not normal. I pushed it open slowly, scanning the small room. Empty, but not right. The bunk was half-made, like someone had been pulled away while making it. Keith's locker hung open, clothes spilling out. And then I saw it, a dark smear on the floor near the desk. Blood. I crouched down, touched it with my finger. Still tacky, recent. I stood up fast, wiping my hand on my pants. This wasn't some disciplinary thing. This was something else. Lee. I needed to find Lee. If they'd taken Keith, Lee might be next, or already gone. I made my way to medical, moving faster now, less concerned about looking casual. The medical bay was dim, just the night lights on. A single corpsman sat at the desk near the entrance, half asleep over a magazine. "I need to see Lieutenant Rios," I said. The corpsman blinked up at me. "Visiting hours are over, sir." "It's important." He sighed. "Bay 3, bed 2, 5 minutes. I nodded and pushed past him. Bay 3 was at the end of the row. Lee was propped up in bed, his arm bandaged. He looked pale, tired. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Atlas," he whispered. "What are you doing here?" I pulled a chair close to his bed. "Keith's gone. What happened?" Lee glanced around, then leaned closer. "They came for him about 3 hours ago. Military police. Said they needed to ask him some questions about our mission report." "What mission report? We didn't file one yet." "Exactly." Lee winced as he shifted in bed. Keith was already worked up, started saying he wasn't going to lie about what we saw, that people needed to know about the creature. He shook his head. "They dragged him out, literally dragged him." "Shit." I ran a hand through my hair. "Have they been to see you?" Lee nodded. "Gardner came by personally. Reminded me about the non-disclosure agreement. Said they were just debriefing Keith separately because of his heightened emotional state." "You believe that?" "Hell no." Lee glanced at his bandaged arm. "They've got me stuck here until tomorrow. Doctor says it's for observation, but I'm being watched. There's been someone outside that door since Gardner left." I stood up. "I'm going to find Jackson. Then we'll figure this out." "Be careful," Lee said, grabbing my wrist. "Something's wrong. More wrong than just what happened on that island." I nodded and left, trying to look casual as I passed the corpsman. As I turned the corner toward the officer's wing, I heard voices. I slowed down, pressed myself against the wall. Containing the breach is priority 1. What about the other pilots? If they stick to the story, no problem. But if they start talking like Simmons, eliminating witnesses creates more questions. Not if it looks like an accident. My blood went cold. That was Commander Richards, Gardner's second. The other voice I didn't recognize. They were talking about us, about making us disappear. I backed away slowly, then turned and moved quickly down a different corridor. I needed to find Jackson now. If they were planning to eliminate witnesses, we were running out of time. I checked the mess hall. Empty. Our quarters. Empty. The rec room. Nothing. Where the hell was he? Then it hit me. The hangar deck. Jackson always went there when he needed to think. Something about the planes calmed him down. I took the stairs 2 at a time, moving faster now. The hangar deck was dim, just emergency lighting illuminating the massive space. Rows of aircraft sat in silence. I moved between them, searching. "Jackson?" I called softly. No answer. I turned a corner and froze. There, by one of the Catalinas, the same type we'd flown to the island, stood Gardner. And he had a gun pointed at Jackson's head. "Nice of you to join us, Lieutenant Chapman," Gardner said without looking at me. "We were just discussing your friend's travel plans." Jackson's eyes met mine. His lip was split, blood trickling down his chin. The Catalina behind them had its pre-flight checks completed, fuel line connected, ready to go. "What's happening here, Commander?" I kept my voice steady, eyes on the gun. "What's happening is containment," Gardner said. "Your friend here was planning to leave without authorization, taking some very classified materials with him." I stepped closer, hands raised. "Let's talk about this. Whatever's going on, we can figure it out." Gardner laughed, a hollow sound. "There's nothing to figure out. You saw something you shouldn't have. Simmons couldn't keep his mouth shut, and now..." He shrugged. "Well, accidents happen at sea all the time." "The creature," I said. "That's what this is about." "What is it?" Gardner's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that it stays contained. We all saw it. We know it's real. And who's going to believe you?" Gardner pressed the gun harder against Jackson's temple. 4 pilots who experienced combat stress, who tragically died in a training accident. What did they find on that island in 1937? I was stalling, trying to get closer. Gardner's eyes flicked to me, then back to Jackson. They found something old, something that should have stayed buried. He swallowed hard. "It feeds on fear. That's what the research team discovered before it killed most of them. It consumes terror like food." "The Japanese pilots," Jackson said, his voice strained. "That's why one looked like he died of fright." Gardner nodded. "It marks its victims sometimes. That purple mark you saw, that's how it spreads, like a disease." I was close enough now to see Gardner's face clearly. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. His hand trembled slightly. "You've seen it too," I said. "Haven't you?" "I was there in '38 when they established the quarantine," he whispered. "I saw what it did to the research team, what it's still doing." That's when I noticed it, a faint purple discoloration on the side of Gardner's neck, just visible above his collar, the same mark I'd seen on the Japanese pilot. "Commander," I said slowly, "your neck." Gardner's free hand flew to his collar. His eyes widened in panic. "It's spreading," I said. "That's why you're so desperate to contain this. It's not just about the island anymore. It's about you." "Shut up," Gardner shouted, his gun hand shaking more violently now. I lunged forward, grabbing his wrist and forcing the gun up. It went off, the shot echoing through the hangar. We struggled, and I saw Jackson move from the corner of my eye. Gardner was stronger than he looked, fueled by panic. He slammed me against the side of the plane, and the gun came between us again. Then there was a crack, and Gardner went limp. Jackson stood behind him, holding a wrench, breathing hard. Gardner crumpled to the ground. "You okay?" Jackson asked, dropping the wrench. I nodded, bending down to check Gardner's pulse. "He's alive, just out." "We need to go," Jackson said. "Now." He was planning to kill us both, make it look like we stole the plane and crashed. I grabbed Gardner's gun and tucked it into my waistband. "What about Lee?" "They'll come for him next. But we can't get to him without raising alarms." "And Keith?" Jackson shook his head. "I don't know. But if we stay, we're dead." I looked at the prepared seaplane, then back at Jackson. "What about evidence? We can't just leave with nothing but our word." "Already handled." Jackson patted his jacket pocket. I went back to the briefing room. The filing cabinet wasn't even locked. "I've got copies of everything on Operation Golden Fleece. Maps, reports, everything." I nodded, making a decision. "Let's go. We'll take the plane, get to the mainland, find someone who'll listen. And if no one does, then we make them listen." I climbed into the Catalina, Jackson right behind me. We can't let whatever's on that island spread, and it looks like it already has. I sat at the kitchen table in the little beach house, rubbing my eyes. 2 days since our escape. 2 days of looking over our shoulders. The place was nothing special, just a small wooden structure on a remote part of a Hawaiian island. 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, living area. The kind of spot tourists rent when they want to get away from everything. Jackson was across from me, hunched over papers spread across the table. He'd found someone, wouldn't tell me who, that could translate the Japanese documents we'd taken. "You should sleep," Jackson said without looking up. "Can't." I took a sip of coffee. It was cold. "What do they say?" He pushed some pages toward me. "It's worse than we thought." I picked up the first page and started reading. The handwriting was neat, the translation careful. It described an American geological expedition in 1937 that discovered something in a cave system on the island. Something ancient. Something that wasn't supposed to be disturbed. "Jesus," I muttered, moving to the next page. "Keep reading." The Japanese had found it too, completely separate from us. In 1936, a year before our people, they'd sent a research team that never returned. Then a military team. The documents we found were from their second military expedition, attempting to understand what happened to the first. "They were trying to weaponize it," Jackson said, tapping a paragraph near the bottom of the 3rd page. "Both sides were." I read the passage. The Japanese had figured out that the entity, that's what they called it, fed on fear, marked its victims somehow, and once marked, the victims would die of fright within days, even if they left the island. "Operation Golden Fleece," I said. "That's what Gardner called it." "Yeah, our side had the same idea. Control it. Use it." I stood up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. The beach was empty. It always was. That's why we picked this place. "Think anyone followed us?" Jackson asked. "Don't know. Don't think so." I let the curtain fall back. "We need to turn on the radio. Check the news." Jackson nodded and reached for the small radio on the counter. He turned the dial until voices came through the static. "Continuing our coverage of naval news," the announcer was saying. The Navy reports that a PBY Catalina seaplane from the USS Enterprise has been lost at sea during a routine training exercise. All 4 crew members are presumed dead. The names are being withheld pending notification of next of kin. In other news, Jackson switched it off. Well, that answers that question. We're dead, I said. The words felt strange in my mouth. Gives us some time at least. I sat back down at the table. What about Lee? Did they get him too? I don't know, Jackson said quietly. Maybe they're keeping him quiet in medical, maybe. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. What are we going to do? I asked. We can't just sit here forever. We could go public, Jackson suggested. Tell someone what happened. I shook my head. And say what? That we saw a monster on an island that doesn't officially exist? That both the US and Japanese governments are trying to turn it into a weapon? With what proof? We have the documents. In Japanese. That we stole. After going AWOL. I ran a hand through my hair. Best case, they lock us up as deserters. Worst case, they kill us, Jackson finished, like they were going to on the carrier. I stood up again, too restless to sit. We need to think this through. If what these papers say is true, that thing marks its victims. Gardner had that mark on his neck, same as the Japanese pilot. If it spreads, it could get off the island, Jackson said, if they keep sending people there. We sat in silence for a minute, the weight of it all pressing down on us. We need to split up, I finally said. Too dangerous to stay together. Jackson looked at me hard. You sure? No, but if they find one of us, the other needs to be somewhere else. Someone has to survive to tell this story someday. He nodded slowly. Makes sense. We'll need new names, new everything. I've got a guy in Honolulu who can help with that, Jackson said. Same one who translated these. We should copy these documents, hide them separately. And meet up, Jackson added, regularly, to make sure we're both still alive. Once a year, I suggested. Somewhere public, but not obvious. Golden Gate Bridge, April 15th, noon. I nodded. If one of us doesn't show 2 years in a row, then the other one knows. I grabbed a notebook from my pack and a pencil. I'm writing everything down, everything we saw, everything we know. They'll be looking for that, Jackson warned. Not if I code it, make it look like something else. I started writing, keeping it simple but changing names, places, making it sound like fiction. I included the coordinates of the island, details about Operation Golden Fleece, descriptions of the entity, everything someone would need if they were trying to piece this together. What about Lee's family? Jackson asked suddenly. And Keith's? I looked up from my writing. What about them? They deserve to know. Know what? That their sons died because our government is messing with something it shouldn't? I shook my head. Nothing we can tell them will help. Nothing we can prove anyway. Jackson didn't argue. He just gathered up the translated papers and started making his own copy. We worked through the afternoon and into the evening. When I finished my notebook, I read through it once more. It wouldn't make sense to anyone who didn't know what to look for. But the information was there, buried in what looked like a journal or a story. I'm taking the morning boat to the main island, I said, closing the notebook. From there, I'll figure out how to get to the mainland. I've got a contact in Seattle, Jackson said. Might head that way. Better if I don't know. He nodded. Yeah, better if I don't know where you're going either. I packed my few belongings and the notebook into a small bag. Tomorrow I'd be someone else. New name, new life. always looking over my shoulder. "This isn't over," I said. "Someone needs to stop this. The entity, the project, all of it." "We will," Jackson said, "when we have enough proof, when we find the right people to tell." I nodded, but I wasn't sure I believed it. The government had buried this once. They could do it again. In the morning, I stood on the porch with my bag. Jackson came out to see me off. "So this is it," he said. "For now." I held out my hand. 1 year, Golden Gate. Jackson took my hand and shook it firmly. We looked at each other for a long moment, both understanding the burden we were carrying, the knowledge, the danger. "Watch your back," I said. "You too." I turned and started walking down the path toward the road, not looking back. The weight of the notebook in my bag felt like carrying a bomb.